Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
So, here we are, episode 101 of the Inside Kingston Podcast, and I still can't quite believe it. You know, when I first started this show, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it to episode 10. And when I listen back to the first few episodes, the absolutely cringeworthy performance I gave makes it all the more impressive that you, my wonderful listeners, have stuck with me this far. Okay, so I want to start by thanking each and every one of our special guests on this show. It truly has been a pleasure hosting this podcast and getting a chance to learn from the stories and insights of all sorts of fascinating people. No doubt many of our guests are people I would have met with for other reasons, but I'm convinced that the podcast interview had a much different effect on how I related to them. For instance, I invested more time preparing for the interviews than I would for a typical meeting, and the podcast interview format gave me the opportunity to focus strictly on the guest and his or her story. So I feel that I learned more about the person through a podcast interview than I would in a typical networking meeting. And I also got to share what I learned with my listeners, most of whom, of course, reside right here in Kingston. But before we dive into some of the things I've learned over these 100 interviews, allow me to just take a step back and get into the why behind this podcast. Most people acknowledge that networking, that is, creating a fabric of personal contacts to provide support, feedback, insight, and resources, is an essential activity for small business owners. Well, it was with this in mind that in 2019, I launched the Inside Kingston podcast. You see, the idea was to create a show that would allow me to connect with the local business community here in Kingston, telling the stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders here in our region. The aim of the show has always been about highlighting these people, their businesses, and what they're doing in the community, bringing you an awareness about what they do and why they do it. In short, the goal was to get to know folks in the local business community, forge professional connections and friendships, and hopefully, in my own small way, create a platform to strengthen the business community in and around Kingston. So to celebrate having interviewed 100 local business owners in the Kingston community, I thought it would be good to look back and review some of the lessons I learned from them. Number 1, put your ideas on the table. This idea was shared several times throughout the past 2 years of the show. In essence, your goal as a small business owner should be to find a way that feels easy for you to share your message with others. This could be a blog, podcast, videos, live social events in the area, or anything else. And it's never been easier to do so. You know, you can write a blog for free on a platform like Medium. You can create videos on your phone and publish them on the likes of YouTube. And you can post image-driven messages on Instagram. Basically, there are no excuses. By putting your ideas on the table, you will not only start to create an awareness about your business in our local community, but other people will also see what you're all about and no doubt will want to help too. 2, make contact with the people you admire. Social media makes it easy for you to contact other local business owners and/or professionals you admire. As an example, most of my guests and interviews here on the show came from me reaching out to people I thought would add value to you as the listener. And I can't remember many people who said no. As a result, many of those connections have turned into business relationships and personal friendships. 3. Consistently show up. Over the course of the last 2 years and 100 episodes, I only missed a couple of weeks from my regular publishing schedule. Sure, I had to get creative some weeks, but that's how you roll when you're doing something that's important to you. Many of our guests spoke about the importance of being consistent in running their business and their marketing efforts. And the bottom line is this: you never know what will happen, or when it will happen, or who's consuming your content. So keep at it consistently, and the results will come. 4. Action leads to clarity, not the other way around. One of the most interesting recurring points I heard from our guests was around how they found the thing they became passionate about. And the truth is, I don't think they found it at all. Instead, they created it. In other words, through the ups and downs of my guests' respective journeys, they found something that interested them. They then worked really hard to make a business or career out of it, and then they developed a passion for it as a result. The point being that if you're feeling stuck, you typically can't just think your way out of a situation. You need to take some kind of small action, get feedback, and make your next move accordingly. It's similar to confidence. You don't act when you are confident. You become confident after taking action long enough to know that you've got this. 5. Just do it. Words along these lines were hands down the most common advice my guests shared with you, the listener. As a personal example, when I started the podcast, I knew exactly 2 of my guests, and I've now interviewed 100. Yet, for many people, this would be a reason to stall on publishing even episode number 1. And that's exactly how dreams are destroyed. The solution to this is, of course, to take a tiny action, start before you're ready, and get into building momentum. In the process of these 100 conversations, I've also learned about the books, the podcasts, the TED Talks that have inspired our guests, most of which led to interesting discussions about leadership techniques, about building teams, about intriguing business strategies, memorable experiences, etc., etc. And my guests were only too happy to share the methods and the mindset it took for them to transform their businesses and their lives into something better. And hopefully these provided inspiration and practical wisdom to you too. So what next for the Inside Kingston podcast? Is it adieu or au revoir? Well, I'm not sure. As I prepare to focus on new challenges and projects, I thought it would be remiss of me to start a new chapter without reflecting on the lessons learned from the act of publishing 100 episodes of the podcast in the first place. And what I do know is that I'll never be able to interview everyone in our community who has a story worth sharing. But in any case, I trust you'll find that each of these 100 episodes have been a step in the right direction. Bye for now. That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.